Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Monday, October 24th, and it's a rainy day here in New Hampshire. Kind of cloudy and pretty dark this morning, but I'm glad to share this moment with you. I hope you guys are waking up feeling ready to go and refreshed. Today's Monday, October the 24th, and we have been in this study, right, in the Gospel of Matthew. A great study that has been taking us through the early foundational period of Jesus' ministry, getting an opportunity to see how Jesus is really the fulfillment of so many of these Old Testament passages. So that it has been underscoring again the origins of Jesus' birth. From there, we have also then taken a look and began to recognize some of the authority and power that Jesus demonstrated with his words and with his deeds. And so we saw and read many of these teachings and miracles from about chapters 5 all the way through about chapter 10. And then we have been in another study that took us through opportunities where we saw so many varied responses that were being offered to Jesus and his ministry. Those who were convinced, those who were curious, and those who have become a bit combative. And eventually we're seeing that heighten more and more throughout Jesus' ministry. So we have found ourselves now at a time when it becomes clear that many people have come to a place where they are misunderstanding much of what Jesus is seeking to accomplish. And this tension is beginning more and more. Jesus has done a number of miracles, came to his hometown, was rejected, was confronted by Pharisees and teachers of the law that had come up from Jerusalem, and they are rejecting Jesus. So we read how Jesus left, right, this hometown region and went all the way to Tyre and Sidon, seacoast towns that were wealthy, cosmopolitan, and godless. It was a very Gentile city. One in which proliferation of ideas were flowing around, but this idea of a commitment to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was not found, even if it was just being voiced, right? So Jesus goes to this region, and it is a stark contrast from being with the Jews in and around Galilee. While he's there, he meets this Canaanite woman, and we have looked at all last week his interaction with her, demonstrating that Jesus has come, and in a very marked way, we're being told that Jesus is the Savior of all people, and his interaction with this woman from this Canaanite woman just underscores that for you and for me. But there's another story that comes right on the heels of this story, and I'd like to read that with you this morning. This passage is found in Matthew 15, and I'd like to pick it up at around verse 29. So Jesus had just finished healing this Samaritan woman. This Canaanite woman, her daughter, and now it says that Jesus left there. This is verse 29. It says Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up on a mountain, and he sat down, and great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet. And he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people, For they have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way." His disciples answered, "Where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd?" "Well, how many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked. "7," they replied, "and a few small fish." He told the crowds to sit down on the ground, and then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. For they all ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was 4,000 men, besides women and children. And after Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got into the boat and went to the vicinity of Magadan. This is a story that kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? And before I begin, I just thought I would just raise a question, and that is, have you ever gone through an experience thinking what a waste of time that really was, right? Until a short time later, you begin to recognize that maybe there was a lot more to this than you thought. That as you look back in that rearview mirror, which is always easy to do, right? Once we have lived through certain types of experiences, we look back and we recognize, maybe there was much more value in that than I originally considered. So you're looking back and you're thinking, why am I even going through this? This makes no sense. And then a period of time passes, and now you have a little more perspective, and you look back and you you say to yourself, you know what? I think I learned a lot more, and I didn't realize it at the time. Sometimes we learn what to do, and equally important, what not to do. And sometimes during those moments, God can appear to be silent, and he can appear distracted, or worse, maybe even oblivious to my concerns. And we have to exercise restraint during those times, don't we? So that we don't draw the wrong conclusions, because in that moment, when we're beginning to feel as if God is silent or distracted, distant, right? Oblivious to whatever it is that you're going through, you could draw the false conclusion that maybe God just doesn't care about me. That I really don't matter. That this idea of God watching out for me and being faithful, never leaving, forsaking me, it just doesn't. I'm not feeling it today. Well, last week in this passage that we looked at, the Canaanite woman, wasn't that her concerns? Wasn't Jesus being silent towards her? Didn't he appear to be distracted so that when he spoke, he didn't even address her directly? He spoke to his disciples first. And then when he did address her, it seemed like he was oblivious to her concerns. And yet I think that Jesus, throughout that whole time, was just drawing her out, kind of like letting her see, for herself what it is that she really wanted and who it was that she was really addressing. Jesus uses parables like this too, doesn't he? Sometimes he'll tell us a parable, for instance, like the parable of the sower and the seeds. And he tells the parable, and everybody, sits there and they're wondering, like, what is that all about? Have you noticed that not everybody comes back and says, hey, can you explain to me what that parable was? See, for some people, they'll hear the parable and they just shake their head and they go, this is bizarre. I'm not even interested. And they walk away. So what is their level of interest really? Well, how much are they pursuing Jesus? Maybe it could be the curiosity of the moment, but there's maybe an intellectual curiosity, but they don't really want to know. And that's the issue, right? And that's why I think Jesus engaging with this woman at the end, the way she responds to him, his response was, wow, I have not seen, such great faith. and he meets her request. So I'm telling you this because this idea, it goes all the way back to Jesus's Sermon on the Mount, when he says we have to keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking, right? When he says, ask and the door shall be opened, ask and you shall receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened. Yeah, because God wants to see from us that continued kind of effort that we're going to make to really get to know him. And so we learn this lesson through the Samaritan woman, but that story continues now. It says that Jesus leaves there and goes along to the Sea of Galilee. And then he goes up to a mountainside and he sits down. We're told that in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus would travel through from the vicinity of Tyre and Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. That insight that Mark brings, fits perfectly with how this story unfolds. And the reason why I say that is because the Decapolis is another Gentile vicinity. It's not the mainstay of where the Jews live. So Jesus is leaving one Gentile vicinity and going into another. And I can't underscore enough for us how combative those cultures were one towards the other. A Jew would not go into a Gentile's home. If they had interaction with a Gentile, they would consider themselves ritually unclean. I mean, you could go back to stories like, remember when Peter received a vision? He was sleeping and a sheet was lowered down and it had all these animals on it, and it said, "Rise and eat." And this is a part of the story of Cornelius, another Roman centurion who is sending to Peter because he had received a vision. When Peter arrives at Cornelius's home, he tells him, that it's not lawful for a Jew to enter into a Gentile's home. I mean, this is Peter, the apostle, talking to this Gentile man. But Peter goes because he felt like, that God had prompted him to go. But he should have recognized in the stories of which he was a part that God is not a respecter of persons. Because in this passage, we are seeing that Jesus is deliberately going to another Gentile town. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, well, why is he going? Well, one of the first things you see in verse 30, right, is that here is this great crowd that comes to him. And they're bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, many others, and they're laying them at Jesus' feet, and Jesus is healing them. Think about that. Here is another whole sector of humanity, but are their problems any different? Are they not also having to experience the brokenness that is in this world? Do they not find themselves now also trying to find remedies for things that are beyond their control? It doesn't matter if they're a Jew or a Gentile. We still have to contend with life in this broken world and the heartbreak that it brings, right? The amount of anxiety and angst. Can you imagine each and every one of these families and friends who are coming and bringing people whose quality of life is greatly impacted? Lame, blind, crippled, mute. What a cross-section of humanity now being placed before Jesus. But it says that Jesus healed them all. This past Sunday I made reference of a passage where John the Baptist sends to Jesus, and he's looking for some kind of reassurance that Jesus truly is the Messiah, because John had drawn the wrong conclusion that when the Messiah would come, it would be an immediate victory. It's like Jesus, Jesus the Messiah would show up and then all of a sudden everything would be made new. But in God's plan of redemption, the first coming of Jesus is for him to give his life a ransom for the sins of man. He's going to pay the penalty of man's sin. That is constantly driven home throughout the scriptures. But Jesus also came so that you and I might understand the kingdom of heaven. He came preaching the good news of this kingdom, teaching in the synagogues, reminding people of all these passages where God in the Old Testament had been prompting the prophets to look clearly about what's going on or what's going to happen in the future. But those events became conflagrated together, and after a while, people didn't realize that there was some distance in between when those things would happen. So, for instance, the coming of Jesus was just the beginning. And yet when Jesus comes back for the second time, it's going to be to restore all things, to bring about the redemption that he has promised, to finish this work that he has begun. But John the Baptist, in his preaching, he was losing that perspective. He thought all this was going to happen together. So you can imagine how he would feel a little bewildered, and it would shake his confidence when it didn't happen the way he thought it should. I tell you this because if you go back and look at Matthew chapter 11, in Matthew chapter 11 and in the opening verses there, you realize that John is in prison, and he sends some of his disciples to Jesus, wanting to know if Jesus really is the one. Because what is he hearing? He's hearing that Jesus has begun to come alongside the likes of tax collectors and sinners. He's called Matthew to be part of his circle of disciples. Jesus has healed, a Roman centurion's servant, right? All of this is beginning to really shake John's understanding. When Jesus responds by saying this. He says, I want you to go back and report to John what you hear and see. That the blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and good news is preached to the poor. So here is this passage, right, that we're looking at, and I'm gonna put something up on here on your screen for you, because this was for Matthew 11 and verses 4 to 5, and when you turn to that passage, this is the passage that we just looked at, where now John is being reassured. But notice how he's being reassured. He's being reassured by the fact that Jesus is doing what the Messiah had been promising. So when the Messiah was going to come, he was to do all of these things. So when you read in your text, for instance, that when Jesus, go back, tell John that the blind receive the sight, the lame walk, the leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised. I want you to see something else in this passage that I think is also really important. In this passage, this is basically a quotation of a couple of different places. One is found here in Isaiah 35. And if you look at Isaiah 35, 5 through 6, and also if you look at Isaiah 61, and you could look at verses 1 through 3. I'm just putting this up on your screen so that you can write down these verses and then go back and look at them. These are really great passages for you and I to take a look at. But why am I telling you this? As I look them up in my Bible now, I'm gonna put them on your screen. No, that's not it. Here we go. This, when Jesus is saying, "Go back and tell John what you see," he is referring back to prophecy that was given about what is going to happen when the Messiah comes. And notice what it says here in verses 5 through 6. It says, "Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy." You see, that is a passage, Isaiah 35, 5 and 6. It's again speaking of a time when joy is going to be revisited as a result of the redemption that God's Messiah is going to bring. Can I give you one more passage? And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want you to recognize what Jesus is doing in healing all of these Gentiles is he's demonstrating this is the work that the Messiah is going to do. So what Jesus is saying is that the Messiah is also for all of these Gentile people, not just the Jews. The same healing that God had done for all of the Jews, he is also doing now for all of the Gentiles. Listen what it says here in Isaiah 61. It says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign," and you've heard Jesus refer to this passage again in the book of Luke when he begins his public ministry. But he quotes here from Isaiah 61, and it says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has appointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, and to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor." See, this is speaking to you and me again of what is going to take place as a result of the Messiah's coming. Jesus is demonstrating by healing all of the blind, the mute, the lame, right, in this Gentile vicinity, that it's not just the Jews that are going to receive this blessing of the Messiah. It's also going to come from Jesus. What a great, great insight that we're given. I'm going to unpack more of this for you tomorrow. And so rather than begin a new thought here in this passage, I just want to let that settle in. Very often people balk at the claim that when Jesus says that he is Lord of all. Well, here is a passage that is beginning to underscore again that the ministry of Jesus was not just for the Jew. It was for all the world, Gentiles included. And so he is crossing all kinds of cultural boundaries, economic, social, political, right? He's crossing those boundaries, and yet he is also demonstrating power and authority as the Son of God, who has come into the world to save us from our sin. Tomorrow we'll pick this theme up and we'll continue again, and we'll look at a number of other passages that just underscore what Jesus is doing here in Matthew chapter 15. So I hope this idea of Jesus as King of Kings and Lord of Lords just rests with you today, and it just encourages you to seize the day and remember that God is good all the time. Lord willing, looking forward to spending more time again tomorrow. God bless.